Godfrey and Godric and Godwin, and you've got Radigan and Renala and Ranny and Rykard and Radon, and then you've got Marika and Mikola and Margit and Margit and Moog and Millennia and Mikella, and it's just like, all right, like you guys really like G, R, and M names, and I understand why. I understand George R. R. Martin wrote it, and he may have done that. Who knows? Or maybe they did it as an homage to him. I don't know.
Maybe.
But like, it does make things a little bit convoluted when you're like, hold on, who are you, and what should I know about you?
Just as a reminder, this is a spoiler-heavy podcast. The notes for what series might be popping up will be in the description. Hi, everybody, and welcome to once again another episode of Gaming Theater Podcast. Today's episode is episode 5, where we're discussing naming conventions in fiction. Because there's a lot more to storytelling than just games and other things that we work with. To help me out in discussing this subject, I'm going to introduce a couple of friends that we might have talked to before. My name is Leo, the Geek Scorpio.
I'm Daine. I go by D&Daine on the internet, most places, and then other places not so much.
I'm Kyle, and I go by K-By.
Great. Now, before we get started in exploring this subject, let's go take a trip to the magical merch booth. Alright, so here we are back at the magical merch booth. And right now, all they have is just, basically not much. Man, this bard that's supposed to be watching this place really kind of drops the ball once in a while. He is the only one that's here, though. But all he just left behind is just a bunch of signs that says, come watch D&Daine on Twitch. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm a Twitch affiliate streamer over on twitch.tv/D&Daine. That's DANDDAINE. And I stream Tuesdays, Thursdays, 7:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time until about midnight when I have to feed my cat or he attacks me. Additionally, you can find me on TikTok at that same handle, and on Twitter at Daine, DAINE, not NOT, Daine, DANE.
All right. And I'll make sure there's some links for that in the descriptions and such.
Yeah.
But while we're waiting for that, the lines that looks like they're moving by. All right, let's get started with the episode. So with this, what we're kind of looking into is gaming theater was we get to explore with different things that are video game and video game related. But in this particular spot, to me, video games are just another way of doing storytelling. And so this is one of the few places where we can actually explore that aspect of storytelling. A way some people do storytelling is when they have characters that they're listed, that they have a naming convention. And if done right, a naming convention is mostly a shorthand for how your world is processed for that, or how your world is designed. Like, if you want a big difference in it, we use naming conventions here in the real world all the time. Different dialects, different names, different styles of naming. Some of them have different origins for themselves. Probably the best example for how we would use it in world building and storytelling would be probably going from with ideas from one of the big names in world building and storytelling, and that's Tolkien. So Tolkien has different ways of naming his characters. Hobbits are named one way through the Shire, dwarves are named a different way, and elves are named differently. From what I could find with some of the research, every elf is given their name by their parent, and as such, a lot of those elves tend to have singular names. Elrond is Elrond, there is no other Elrond.
One thing that I find interesting about that is that there is, and we're not sure what the etymology of this is, but there is a couple of instances in the notes of Tolkien that have differing people being or different names for the same character or the same name for different characters. Um, I can't remember who off the top of my head. I will dig into that really quickly, but I believe there's an elf who's a very well-known elf in the Silmarillion. It's just been a hot minute, and their name appears elsewhere in like a glossary describing an event that this elf did not partake in, which I think is interesting. And we're not sure, obviously, because Christopher Tolkien and the rest of the Tolkien estate were compiling notes left behind by the the great J.R.R. Tolkien. We're not sure necessarily if it was like he wrote a note on a napkin and then scrapped that idea or changed the idea, or maybe he was referring to somebody else, but the name was nearby. Like, we're not really sure why that is the case, but that is one of those instances that I do find a little bit funny.
It's kind of hilarious because, like, one of the big things is that Tolkien, did names. He understood naming conventions and such. It's one of the things he studied before he did created worlds like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Um, but to the point is that they're named in very specific ways. Like, um, even if your knowledge of Lord of the Rings is simply having seen the one of the three movies, not even the whole trilogy. Um, Legolas is Legolas. He's just the elf. That a Legolas. That's it. Then you have Gimli, who tells you his entire lineage when he says his name, because that's just how they present their names in dwarven culture. So their culture builds up to that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I did find it was, I believe it was Glorfindel. There was Glorfindel of Gondolin who died fighting a Balrog as he was escaping the Elven City, and then there was another Glorfindel who is an Elven Lord of Rivendell. And so it's kind of interesting to me that like that same name is. I mean, it's pretty, like you mentioned, they're very unique names and not often used twice because that's what Tolkien did. So I just find that an interesting footnote there.
Another type of naming convention because Tolkien does his in the real world, and we do have real world examples for that. Probably some of the most interesting ones that are out there is, um, in the West we have a first name, middle name, and a last name. Most of that's just like a lot of things in the West, his in Western civilization comes from um, from the old Roman times. Romans would name their children in with a first name, middle name, and a surname, but they're named on that for, funny enough, mostly for bureaucracy reasons. So your first name would then be your common name. This is the one that you tell your friends for. Your last name is your family name. So if you were, say, Leonidas, your last name was, I don't know, like some Roman last name. Why can't I think of one right now? Like Vinici, Augustus.
Augustus.
Then you'd be Leonidas Augustus. And then when you would present yourself, you would present yourself with your middle name. But your middle name is more tied into a house or a clan. And in this case, for a lot of them, they're being pretty literal. The middle name is the house of, let's say, Caesar. Okay, it's a bad example, but still. So your name would be Leonidas Caesar Augustus. Now, because you're a house of Caesar, anything that belongs to the family or the property of Caesar, that's the house that they would find for you. That's, you get into trouble. That's the house of the parents that we need to go talk to. So you wouldn't get a new middle name unless you are somehow removed from your family line for one reason or another, either by shame or by abandoning the your family for one reason or another. And so people with those middle names and those houses will just go on for a while. Another naming convention that we have, which I always found was interesting, is one that England used to do. Um, Back then, when we did the Possibility Sword, there was a line that we said, which is important. In Europe, you would be hard pressed not to find a town with a blacksmith in it. In English naming conventions, because especially during the feudal era, Your naming convention would be your first name is just your surname, and typically it would be something relevant to the church, to Christianity. That's why so many people are named John, Michael, and various others. John, Michael. There's more. Yeah, I
Jacob,
think
Ezekiel,
John,
Alexander.
Jacob, Jacob. However, it's
His name's my name too.
weird,
It's really
right?
weird. Oh,
Me too.
Really?
what are the odds?
Uh, but a weird thing with that one is like your last name would be what your profession is, and that has to deal with caste systems that they had. Your dad was a blacksmith. Your dad's dad was a blacksmith. Your dad's dad was a blacksmith, and so on. And that's the Smith family. It's also one of the reasons why Smith is such a common last name, because every town has a blacksmith in it.
Well, and to kind of add on to that, whether this is anecdotal or not, I can't say for certain, of course, but I do know that when a lot of people immigrated from other places to the United States, some people's native names were a little bit difficult to pronounce for us inbred hick Americans. And so I know that a lot of the time they would choose a surname that was more readily pronounceable, I guess, I would say. So, as an example, Smith or Jones or what have you. And so, like I said, I don't know if there's, I think there is a historical precedent for it, but I don't know. I haven't done the research, to be honest. But in my experience, that is very much so the case. You know, in doing my own genealogy research, my family ironically came from a group of Smiths in blacksmiths in Europe, and they came over and they had a Norwegian name, and it was impronounceable for the Americans who were living there at the time, who mostly came from England. Uh, and so they were like, "Yeah, you're a Smiths now," which kind of works out, but yeah.
Yeah, funny story with myself. My family name is still the same name as my middle name constantly. Now, what happens is that we go by that entirety of our family's last name up until my father, who changed his last name to my current last name, Garcia. And they did that just because it was he had some weird accounting reasons for it. Like it didn't make I'm like, all right, whatever. But if we whatever wanted to, we still kept our original our middle name, and we can trace that back all the way through Spain if I wanted to go back through my genealogy. So there is a way to link that up.
As a matter of middle names, Kyle is my middle name. Turns out that a bit of a strange story. My name was changed without my mother's knowledge by my father after he took her down to the car. He went back in and added a first name that wasn't wanted.
Oh,
Oh,
I've had friends as well, kind of
but
not the
yes.
same situation, but a similar one where they're called something as a first name, but they choose to go by their middle name, or vice versa, right?
Hmm.
Which I find interesting. Chosen
Yeah.
names versus given names.
And especially nowadays, it's since in the modern era, especially in the United States, the naming convention as far as your last name and middle name tracing your family kind of gets in the wash a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's not nearly as important as it was back then, because we had better record keeping. So as such, a lot of people like my nephew, their middle name is basically a name that my sister just wanted to name as it her child, and that was it. Just pick the name on there, and people can change their names all the time. So it made it,
Yeah,
and it's not
absolutely.
as big of a deal as it used to be. An interesting one is one from Japanese naming conventions. They have a weird, almost like title system. Like you change your name partway through it in the ancient Japan.
Yeah.
I think it's. Oh, go
Well,
ahead.
so I think it's interesting because there's a family name and then there's a given name, typically speaking, which is usually inherited patrilinearly, like our names are, our last names are, the family name is, um, which is interesting to me because you have two groups of civilizations who grew up completely apart from one another, and yet they do typically follow similar naming conventions. The only difference being that they put their family name before their given name, which I find interesting.
Yeah, I haven't honestly did a lot of the research on that one, but from my understanding for it, it's the naming conventions is sort of the big difference is in the East it's more about title, whereas in the West it's more about organization. I say it like this because in the West you're more commonly going to be go with your first name, but that's because it's a common name. It's one that you're going to use through with your friends and family and throughout. Whereas in the East, it was especially back then, it was more important for people to know what your title was. So it's more important for you to know them to know your family name, so they know the history of your family. Whereas the other one, it's more individually. Or it could be just someone picked it once and we sort of stuck with it.
Yeah, and that's kind of not even considering, like, I know when you address others in the East, specifically Japan is where my wheelhouse lies. Uh, Given names are not usually used outside of a restricted, informal situation. So, like, the speaker needs to be very familiar with the other person, or if talking to someone of like a lower age or a lower status, because they have a kind of a ranking system inherently built into their civilization. And then given names are also used to refer to children. So it's interesting that like they don't usually use their given names all the time. You know, like I go by Dane because that's to me that's my name. But at the same time, we don't really use like other chosen name. I don't use a chosen name or a nickname or anything like that usually. So that's always been really interesting to me that the given name is only used in specific situations, but outside of that, it's not much.
Yeah. Sometimes it's and as we do it for the real world, we have weird singular names. So names that are given as just one titled name. A lot of times we associate that with celebrities like Cher, Madonna, um,
Mm-hmm.
Prince.
Which is funny is because they Prince is an interesting story because his record label wanted to basically put a copyright on the title Prince for the records, but except Prince didn't want to do that because that's his name, so he would basically have to pay them to use his own legally given name. So he changed the name to after they decided to push forward with this. He changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol, which is why a lot of times you'll hear this people refer to him as the artist formerly known as Prince because we physically have a symbol we can't say.
Absolutely.
Not to mention,
To kind of,
I was going to say, not to mention that you kind of know you've made it if you've turned your name into a single syllable and everybody knows who you're talking about.
true, very true. Yeah, anyone who goes by just their first name is pretty incredible, really.
I know for Madonna, like they when a record label wanted to pick her up, really way back when, she's like they asked her what's her name, and he said my name is Madonna, and she gave her last name, and they're like that can't be right. So in order for her to start recording, she had to get a birth certificate to prove to everybody, yes, my first name actually is Madonna. um, but yeah, so we also do singular names for things such as call signs. You'll hear that a lot in different, especially in the military, especially with like Air Force will do that, and you've seen it if you've watched like the movie Top Gun, Maverick, Goose. And call signs are a little different because a lot of times they're given to you, and it's usually ones that sort of relay your personality. Goose, for example, in Top Gun, is Mother Goose. He likes to keep an eye out on everyone. Iceman is cold, cool, and calculating. Everything he does is flawless. And Maverick as well, he'll go on his own rogue because he's Maverick. They also do that for things like hurricanes and other natural disasters. Typically, only ones that are going to last longer than a day.
I always felt it was weird that we name hurricanes.
It's a strange classification system, but I guess, if you name it, somebody's going to know what you're talking about. If you classify it with just a number and somebody references it later, they're really not going to remember it.
Mm-hmm. I always wonder if that means like when we get to the point of actual space travel, though there's a numbering convention that's used for a lot of stars and planets. Are we just going to change them once we actually could come up with a real name for it?
Planet Bob. Well, we do already name planets that way, but Starbob.
Starbob. So, if you've noticed that these naming conventions tend to be ones that we can relate with, if you are if you're in the Dark Ages and you need to find yourself a baker to get some bread, look for the guy whose last name is Baker. Like, he's probably a baker. And we also have other naming conventions to explain it. Now, if you're wondering why naming conventions are important, if you're writing a set of fiction, naming conventions can be easily used to sort of shortcut your way through the fiction. So there's a whole lot of fictional examples for it. One that I personally I've used for a tabletop role playing game, and I named each of my big bosses that my players had to be named or had to go up against. They were named after the zodiac symbols, so Scorpio, Virgo, Gemini, and he sort of gave them a hint of what the kind of boss it is. If they went after Scorpio, they know it's going to be scorpion-like, probably has a poison attack. And if they had a Gemini, there's going to be two of them, and so on and so forth. And that's one way that I applied it for myself. And so I never had to tell them, hey, you've got 12 bosses to deal with. They just know that there's 12. Those symbols in the zodiac.
I love that naming convention, by the way. I think that's really neat.
Yeah, I like to put in a naming convention once in a while for different RP tabletops.
Kind of speaking of which, I think it's kind of interesting. Speaking, I guess, more recently, I find the naming convention in the video game Elden Ring to be very frustrating, but also interesting, because you've got, oh my god, hold on, Godfrey and Godric and Godwin, and you've got Radigan and Renala and Ranni and Rykard and Radon, and then you've got Marica and Mikola and Margit and Margit and Moog and Millennia and Mikella, and it's just like, all right, like, you guys really like G, R, and M names, and I understand why. I understand George R. R. Martin wrote it, and he may have done that. Who knows? Or maybe they did it as an homage to him. I don't know.
Maybe.
But, like, it does make things a little bit convoluted when you're like, hold on, who are you, and what should I know about you?
You say Godric, and I think Godric Gryffindor, Harry Potter universe.
Yeah, and there you go, right? There's another, like, depending on the conversation, you could misconstrue it to think, oh, we're talking about Harry Potter. And it's like, yeah, when he did this thing and turned into a dragon or whatever. And you're like, wait, hold on, what? I don't remember that.
I don't remember when that happened. I kind of need to know these. I always love naming conventions when you have long running series and they have a title that fits for the story. So, like, Supernatural, right? I think it's something like 70 or 80% of every episode is titled after a classic rock song.
Mm-hmm. Well, and they continue that naming convention forward with their aliases, don't they? Or it's like,
yeah, their aliases are usually the lead singer and the lead guitarist of a band.
Yeah.
Except for once when it was Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell, and I got it. I laughed. It made Dean really sad when he had to, because of circumstances in the show, he had to go by Smith and Smith. It made him, he's like, I could do better. So what's funny is that that's not the only one. There's other reasons for it. One of them I thought was interesting is the show Friends had a naming convention of the one with and whatever the subject of the episode was. It's either Friends or Seinfeld, but it was, the writers didn't want to waste time making up a title for each episode. Fair, and they kept up. Scrubs has another one that's kind of interesting with that, because at the last season of Scrubs, the medical comedy, it stops being about JD and starts being the main character, and starts being about these students going through med school. Okay. And so the title of the episodes used to be for JD, it's my whatever, my daydream, or my first rounds, my whatever. And that's always because of JD. If the show episode ever takes place that JD is not the main character, like it's one of the side characters, it's their whatever, their story.
I don't
Yeah.
like to think about that last season, if I'm being honest. Nothing against anyone who was in that, but it just
Not great, not the same.
wasn't. Yeah, it's weird they only made 7 of them. I heard they were talking about making an 8th season, but I don't think it went anywhere.
Yeah, I don't think that 8th got.
Or if they made 7 seasons, 6 seasons, it's weird they only did 6 seasons.
I missed out on the last season, and I'm kind of hearing that it's a good thing that I did.
But yeah, in your fiction, you'll always have different naming conventions. One of my favorite ones out there is from Zombieland. Each character in Zombieland is named after a city. That's not necessarily where they're from or where they're going. They just pick a city name and go with it. It's kind of a sad reason for it, and it's that people did die left and right in Zombieland. And so because of the high death toll, it was easier to give them a name after a city rather than their personal name because they're more attached to it. It's sort of, I don't know if you'll make it past to midnight, let alone a week from now. I don't want to waste my time remembering your name. I'm just going to call you whatever city it is. San Antonio. Sort of a weird inverse version of it. If you ever played it's the Ghostbusters, the video game, the one with all the actors in the video game. So it's hilarious because they got all the game developer and the director wanted everyone to be able to react just like the actors in, just like they were making another Ghostbusters movie. So it had Harold Ramis, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Ernie Hudson, all reprising their roles. So when they introduce you, the character, which is the new guy on the team, they purposely do not give you a name. And your character has no lines in it, so it was an in-game excuse to have everybody not talk around you.
That's the video game where I got to the last stage before I realized you could actually upgrade your gear.
Hey, I always like to think of it as actually a bonus, a pretty cool thing, if a video game will let you succeed at it by screwing up really badly.
Hard mode.
Man, this game is super hard. Did you upgrade? What? XCOM 2 has an achievement in it for beating the entire game without upgrading your guns once.
I don't know how people do that. I'm not that good.
Not that good. I'm not going to have it. Let's see here. So that's one of my favorite ones. What's interesting for other, and at this point we're just talking some fictional naming conventions, but they're all very important. In Marvel, they have a naming convention in it, which is kind of an interesting one. They have 2 different ones. Or 2 different sets with different reasons for it. Spider-Man's villain characters were always named with an alliteration in mind. Stan Lee did that on purpose. So Peter Parker, there was J. Jonah Jameson,
Otto Octavius,
and he named him that way because it was easier for him to remember it.
Kraven the Hunter. Wait.
Not Kraven the Hunter, but that's not one of his.
No, I know. I'm being dumb.
That also continues with later, like Miles Morales.
But for Stan Lee's purpose, it was, I'm making so many comics, it's easier for me to remember them if I put an alliteration for it. But there's this weird sort of highlight in it, and Marvel sort of explores it briefly, and it comes up once in a while. If you have a person who gets a set of superpowers, until they pick up a name appropriate to themselves, they have a chance of going back to a regular life.
Mm-hmm.
They bring it up in comics. It's like, look, we can just talk to this guy. As long as he doesn't come up with a super villain name, we don't have to worry about him as a big problem. Oh, here comes the Juggernaut. Crap.
Kane Marco. It's just some guy.
The Juggernaut, on the other hand, jeez.
Kind of taking that into consideration, this is a brief aside, but one thing I always find really fascinating is the changing of names, or the reforging of an object to reflect more so with a new name. So as an example, right, you've got Narsil, the longsword wielded, against Sauron in Lord of the Rings, and it's broken. Right, it's eventually broken. It's broken into pieces. They collect as many pieces as they can find, and they keep it on display until, Strider / Aragorn. That's another thing that's really interesting there. He's going by a pseudonym at first, and he's Strider up until they reforged Narsil into Andoril, the Flame of the West. But even then, right? So like you've got the name Narsil, which has a connotation to it. You've got the sword that was broken, which is another name for that same sword, but it still has a different connotation. You've got Andoril, you've got the Flame of the West. You have the sword reforged, and each, depending on what you're calling it, each one of those means something a little bit different, even if it's referring to the same thing. In much the same way that Strider becomes, oh my god, all I can think of is Anduin, and that's not right. What the hell is Strider's real name?
Aragon, Sword of
Aragon. Thank you.
Yeah,
Aragorn. Specifically. I was gonna say
Aragorn.
Aragorn's a
Sorry, yeah, Aragon.
Aragon's the dragon. Here, we're doing it now. We're mixing up names.
Although Aragon does have naming conventions as well. That
very true. Very true.
Names and the true names of things are important to the magic system of that series.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Everyone's gonna be like, man, tired of these fake nerd guys.
Oh, but the X-Men also have a weird naming convention for it. It's considered a type of graduation. You have powers. Yeah, that's one thing. But you have to pick, when you start understanding your powers, you pick your name. It works for almost everyone except for Wolverine. Wolverine gets his name sort of dropped onto him.
And then, I have to wonder if maybe, because some of those names are definitely given name. Like Gold Balls did not choose his name.
Yeah.
Like he's a character in Marvel. He spawns golden orbs. It sounds worse than it is.
Mm.
Yeah, you can't convince me that he woke up one morning and was like, I'm going to be called Gold Balls. Somebody called him Gold Balls, and it stuck. And I think that's actually part of the comic run he's in.
Yeah.
He's stuck with it. He just can't get his PR guy to change it.
Yeah. He's like, could I be called, like, Sphero or something? Nope, Gold Balls.
Gold Balls it is. It wasn't until I was talking to you, Cal, a while ago, like, apparently Final Fantasy XIV has its own naming convention for all the races in there?
Yes, and not just the races specifically.
Oh, yeah.
They divide each one into two different groups, and the naming conventions can vary from group to group. For example, the most human-like race, the Hyr, consists of the Midlanders and the Highlanders, and the Midlanders follow very much those medieval European names where they are associated with their profession, where the Highlanders have more Nordic or Germanic names. One of the more interesting ones, recently, it was revealed the Viera race, who have rabbit ears. They finally revealed what the naming conventions are for them, which I found fascinating, is that they typically have two names. A forest name, because many of them spend their entire life in the forest where they're born, and names for the city, which they often take those names. So the forest name is their given name at birth, but the city name is names that they choose for themselves, and they'll often take the names of other races if they find them interesting. And that actually also applies to both male and female Viera, because at birth, the characteristics that determine male or female aren't actually there.
Huh. That'd just be weird, though, right? Like, you're going to a town, you're like, you know what? I like San Diego. Call me Bill San Diego now.
Where in the world is Bill San Diego?
So, if you're wondering for a different sort of take in naming convention, a big one who has that all in the States is Star Trek. Which I always loved. Worf, for example, was a good example for this. While Worf is in, DS9, and he's there in Star Trek: The Next Generation, you just know him as Worf. He has a whole name from Klingon, but since he works for the Federation, he's just Worf. But like, if he ever has to deal with Klingons and he introduces himself, it's, what is it? Worf, son of Mog, or son of Mog, house of. Oh, I looked that up the other day too.
Moog.
Yeah, so it's Worf, son of Mog, house of Martok.
It was Martok.
Like, he has to give this whole thing. It's like a Tribe Called Quest. You say the whole thing.
True.
And in addition to that, because his son Alexander was raised on Earth, he has a human name, Alexander Vishenko, which is the name of the humans who adopted Worf.
Like, his name doesn't get his cool Klingon name. He just gets Alexander Shenko. Then there's anyone who has who was Borg or formerly Borg. They usually have their old distinction from it.
Locutus of Borg.
Locutus was the exception, though,
Yes, it was.
as were the rest were given designations based on oftentimes how many were assimilated of a crew or something like that.
And it's kind of a neat little shorthand for that one. One that I always thought was really interesting for it is Halo and Neon Genesis Evangelion. So the game Halo, and at least the first game, and Neon Genesis Evangelion have the same or have a similar naming convention that they name things after biblical terms. Some of them get pretty deep in it. In Neon Genesis Evangelion, at some point, they have to deal with a computer virus attacking a bunch of their servers. And each of the major servers are named after the three wise men. Halo, the game, has a bunch of them all over the place if you look for it. Like, Master Chief's name is John 116, I think it is.
His name is Master Chief, obviously.
His name is Master Chief, like Metroid and Zelda.
Yeah.
I need to brush up on my Halo lore. John 117.
Yeah, John 117. It's a passage in the Bible. And obviously the Halos are just named Halos. The Covenant is a religious term as well. But they take their terminology from that. And Neon Genesis Evangelion does the same. They take their what is it? The first Ava that there's out there is Adam, I think.
So, from my understanding, and Evangelion is a very
It's a different sort of anime.
unusual.
It's a different sort of anime.
Adam was the first angel that brought about the second impact, which killed a lot of humanity off. But then each of the following enemies of humanity, as it were, are called angels, and they are named as such, so they're each named after angels. Adam was the first one. There's Sachiel, Shamshel, Ramiel, and they all kind of follow that same sort of naming convention.
Lance Longinus is in that show as well.
Yeah.
I think Eve is mentioned.
Lilith.
Oh, Lilith.
Yeah, Lilith.
Oh, maybe that's what I'm
right.
thinking of.
But yeah, so they throw them. So it's not just a thing in the West. Probably the funniest or the most familiar one is Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. It's kind of fun when those names translate, because in Japan, when they have the anime, their names are still the same in Japan as they are in the United States, right? So so here's a fun fact with the anime. Back in the 90s and the 80s, when they were doing a lot of the translations to move anime from Japan into other countries, they would change their names a lot of times to fit those countries. Nom de plural, make it easier to understand.
Sailor Moon's an example.
Yeah, Sailor Moon's an example. Like, except for Amy. Amy actually is Amy. It's just spelled with differently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for no reason.
But, I mean, for no reason.
I guess they thought it was easy enough for American audiences.
Oh, they'll just change it here. But yeah, they had a Japanese name, and then they had, which is their regular name, and then they had their American name.
The main character, Usagi, in Japan was renamed to Serena, for example.
Darien.
I don't remember Darian's Japanese name. I want to say Mamoru, but I don't think that's right.
No, that is right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Mamoru Chiba.
I mean, Tuxedo Mask.
He'll pop up and then leave again.
My job here is done, but you didn't do anything.
Throws a rose and
then disappears. But yeah, so they would change their names and such. But they didn't do that with Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. When they came over, Goku was Goku. That was it. Which is kind of weird the first time. So, because I'm of Mexican descent, so Goku's wife's name is Chi-Chi. So I'm like, why do they keep calling her boob all the time? Because Chi-Chi is a slang for breasts in Mexico. And I'm like, and this guy's name is Piccolo. Well, that's just kind of a cop-out, really.
He doesn't even play a Piccolo.
Where is this Piccolo of his?
Yeah, I find it interesting that the majority of the cast is named after food.
Hmm.
Gohan being rice, as an example.
There's the Ginyu Force. They're all named after
Mm-hmm.
dairy products. Frieza, Cooler, King Cold, all very on the nose.
Mm-hmm. Raditz, Kakarot, Bardock, which I think is a root.
Yeah, Bardock is a root. Vegeta is just vegetable.
Mm-hmm. What about King Vegeta?
That's a really good vegetable.
Yeah,
That's product placement. What that one is.
true.
It can't help but wonder what the impact would have been had they actually translated the names for the English release. Would they be as memorable?
I don't know, and I don't think that so. Lupin the Third got translated. Had a weird translated convention because when Lupin the Third came to the United States, they titled it as Lupin the Third. However, and this is just a weird one, because even though his name is Lupin, and Lupin is a name we recognize, because it's French for wolf, when the dub came in, everyone would stop, or the dub would dub him as Wolf, even though his name's in the title. They actually had to redo the dub a second time, like when they did a re-release, because they realized that someone just mistranslated it, called him Wolf the entire time, and that's not his name.
It's also his last name, which I think is interesting. Arsene, or
Arsene Lupin the Third.
I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. I'm sorry for any of our French speakers out there, but
I know it's
Arsene Lupin.
Arsene Lupin. Firewolves. That's how you get a firewolf.
Yeah, totally. And one thing that's kind of interesting for those of you who were around in the early 90s for the different types of dubs, we had things like 4Kids who did a bunch of censoring and changing and that sort of thing. And that was kind of what was done at the time. So the Usagi to Serena transformation, very obviously, was one of the more egregious, I would say. But I think it's interesting that depending on what sort of... Uh, I know there's a whole debate on subs versus dubs. I'm not going to go into that right now, but I find it interesting that in the dub of a lot of anime, which is how we figured it out in the West before we, really had the translation technology that we have these days, you would oftentimes, I remember seeing the Oceanic dub of DBZ and the voices sounding nothing like the English dub, or the oh my god, I can't remember the other term for it. There was differences in the dubs, and that included, but was not limited to, character voices, character names. I remember there's a show called Madoka Magica, and which is a very dark show. It's a very dark magical girl show, and 4Kids allegedly was considering, or maybe they actually went through with it. I haven't followed up on it, but they were going to make a 4Kids dub of Madoka Magica, this show that is a very dark magical girl show. And they were going to call it Magical Molly. And it was going to be this show about friendship and, being a magical girl. You can, legitimately, you can Google it. It's an actual thing. And I cannot imagine for the life of me, because of what goes on in that show, I don't know how you would do that. I kind of hope it exists.
Well, why? I'm very curious how that would have turned out.
Yeah, because I saw the whole series of that. I'm like, what did you do? Get to 75% of the first episode and quit?
So allegedly, this is from the 4Kids fandom wiki. So it says, Magical Molly is a TV series distributed by 4Kids Entertainment and Shaft. The series is the second English dubbed version of the popular anime series. First 4Kids series targeted towards an older kid audience rather than children due to dark series and fantasy themes.
Nailed it. Older. That'll save us.
They've dropped the license in 2013. But Molly Kelly, a normal schoolgirl's life turned upside down when she meets Cube, an alien from outer space who can grant wishes for any girl. But a magical girl called Hilda is trying to stop Molly to make a wish on Cube, which is not at all the plot.
Not at all.
The first 3 episodes are family-friendly due to censorship. But apparently the last second half is dark and somewhat serious.
We just hold it till the end. Hold it.
So that's a... I think that's really fascinating, because there's possibly somebody out there who has seen Madoka Magica and not realized that it's Madoka Magica, that it's in fact Magical Molly to them. And that change is so interesting to me.
It's like they saw the first episode or the maybe even the second episode, and it's like, wow, this is really good. Girls are really like this.
Hey,
And then they bought the license, and then yeah, once you get to like fourth episode,
Yeah.
That it all goes downhill from there.
you did say it is spoiler heavy, right? Because I could spoil that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They get the license, and then all of a sudden somebody gets their head bitten off.
Hey,
You
Japan, can I borrow your homework? Yeah, just change it a little bit so that nobody knows.
Actually, funny you should mention that, because I wanted to mention real quick Ghost Stories.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Of
yes.
the dub of that could be an episode in and of itself. The only stipulation is that they couldn't change the names of the characters, and they couldn't change how the ghosts were exorcised in the end. Aside from that, they were given total creative control over what the character said, and it is fascinating.
It is so fascinating because I've seen the episode, some of those episodes in Japanese with a sub, and I've seen them in the United States with a dub, and wow, that is a world of difference. It's one of those things you kind of have to experience.
Ghost Stories is hilarious. I think there's episodes of it up on YouTube.
I think so.
Check it out if you're bored. It's so good. It's
They
so good.
made it intentionally offensive, so
Yeah,
a bit of a disclaimer there.
it is crass. If you want friendly, do not do that one. It is amazing.
It is crass. Yes, no, but it is hysterical.
But yeah, so like that's sort of the important thing with naming conventions. You kind of have whatever you work with, you have it for different reasons. Sometimes it's a shorthand. Sometimes it's we started this naming him after these things, and we're just going to keep on trucking this way. There used to be a sort of an in joke for a lot of shows and such as there we have the one Steve rule. You have one character named Steve. That's it. Nobody else can have that name. And it makes sense if you have a show, just because you don't want to have to. That's Steve. That's also Steve. That's Steve there.
When they do that, it's oftentimes as like a single throwaway joke too. I'm trying to think of any examples of that, but I can't.
Like when they have it, Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
That's a good one actually.
There's more than one Scott in the movie, and in the comics too. There's more than one Scott. But they only show up for like a minute and they leave. Another fun naming convention is, I think, Gundam has some of them, or at least Gundam Wing does.
Gundam Wing definitely. Each of the pilots is a number more or less with their name, just with different languages. Hero, Duo, Troa, Katra, and Wufei.
Oh yeah, because there's 5 of them, right?
Correct. 5 of the main character Gundam pilots.
Another one that's kind of an interesting one. Batman has, not even Batman, just DC in general, especially during their Gold and Silver Age. Whatever they named the villain is sort of the theme for their entire villainry. Penguin was always going to go after things that were bird-like. Two-Face would go after anything but the number 2. And then you have Lex Luthor, which is just whatever Lex Luthor wants to do. That one's not so much a naming convention as Lex Luthor is a regular person's name, so he just wants money.
And he has it too.
And he has the money. He doesn't need said money. This is more confusing. Why are you doing these crimes?
Lex Luthor stole 40 cakes, and that's just terrible.
Sometimes I just think he's just stealing them just to be, a troll. Like, I can fight Superman, but I also am going to steal 40 cakes while I'm at it. DuckTales and the DuckTales universe, everything has to be a pun for it. But I have to give them kudos for it. They go ham with their duck puns in that.
Let's see. Another good example. There was Gargoyles as well.
Gargoyles, yes. Gargoyles takes a different sort of take on it, and what's interesting is their naming convention is in universe a proper naming convention for itself. So, for those who haven't watched the show Gargoyles, gargoyles do not have a name. They always look so distinct that they just sort of never bothered to put any names to them. The only gargoyle that actually has a name for years is Goliath, and that's just because he's the leader of the gargoyles. We need to call him something, and since he has an alliance with the humans' castle that they live in, they make that he allows them to give him a name.
They actually reference that in the show too, where sort of a vision of the past when a human child is asking one of the gargoyles at the time, who has no name at that time. So what do you call each other? Friend?
And that's it. He just leaves it at that. I think that's Brooklyn.
Yeah, it was Brooklyn
that he talks to. Yeah, but when they get to the modern day, by modern day 1996, when they get to the modern day, to the modern era, the gargoyles then decide. Basically, there's so few of them left that they just want to change it up, and they want to take a name, and most of them take a name from a part of the city: Bronx, Brooklyn, Broadway,
Lexington.
My favorite is Hudson. Hudson does it because he's just like he loses an argument because he goes up to Lisa Mazza and she goes, "Hey, we don't need names. Do you have names for the sky? Do you have names for the river? The river's called the Hudson." Fine. But then there's other ones because they're tied so much into Shakespearean that a lot of names come in from different Shakespearean plays. It's like the weirdest thing that I always love that they sort of slide in that Shakespeare may be more of a historian than he is a fictional writer in that world.
Right. More historian, because it turns out that it's not so fiction after all.
Yeah. There is a Puck. There is one of the ones that they go up against is Macbeth.
In addition to that, one of the gargoyles is bestowed a name by the humans because they're hunting her, which is Demona. She was given that name to obviously demonize her. It's pretty on the nose there.
Yeah, very much on the nose. I was on there. What's funny is that, and this is in later seasons, Goliath's daughter shows up, and her name is just Angela. Kind of a regular name in comparison to everyone else's, but she's named from all the gargoyles there get names because at some point Goliath and his crew are the last remaining gargoyles, save for a bunch of eggs. But they know that they cannot. They get put into a curse that prevents them from waking unless I think the curse literally states they are not to awaken unless the castle their home is in the sky or something like that. No, their home is above the clouds. And so when they do this, they have he knows that these eggs need to be washed over, but he can't do that because he's going to self-sacrifice himself and make sure that the castle gets abandoned by leaving the gargoyles permanently in stone. So they take the princess of the castle, decides to take care of all the eggs, and she takes them with him to Avalon, a place where they know that they will be safe. But time doesn't work the same way in Avalon, so time moves a lot faster in Avalon than it does on Earth. And so by the time Angela, the first time he meets his daughter, it's really just the egg, and even he doesn't. The daughter and they don't even know who's related to who because they look so different. But by the time Goliath goes to Avalon, they have Angela's, I think, 18, 19 years old.
Something like that.
Early 20s.
I'm not 100% sure. It's been ages since I've seen it. I need to watch it again.
It's been ages. She's old enough to be, so she's the same age as some of the other gargoyles that are there, except for Goliath and Hudson. And Hudson, at this point, is probably the oldest gargoyle that's still alive. But she gets a regular name because all the gargoyles that hatched from these eggs, the princess gave each one of them regular Christianity names, which makes sense because she's from Scotland. Also, at some point I am going to do an episode on magical conventions and such, but that's a different
magic systems.
Gargoyles is always a weird one because technically, if you're blind or deaf, you're immune to most magics.
Kind of interesting that way.
Those are sort of the big naming conventions. There's only one other one that I always find interesting is when someone just sort of picks a name just for the fun of it. We mentioned it before in Supernatural. Dean and Sam, when they have a fake alias, there's always a band member that they're doing.
Right.
In the show Leverage, in the first season, one of the characters, I'm trying to remember his name, but he's the mastermind in Leverage. He would name himself after Doctor Who actors.
Rusty Shackleford.
And then you have Rusty Shackleford, which is a whole... Oh. I just love that there actually is a Rusty Shackleford.
There is no Rusty Shackleford. That's just a name he uses when he wants to order pizza.
Oh no, I gotta go to the hospital. Tell them that my name's Rusty Shackleford. That guy has better insurance. His name is Nathan Ford. That's it. He's from Leverage. Nathan Ford will usually pick the aliases that are Doctor Who actors. So Tom Baker, for example. But yeah, so these are some of the naming conventions on it. I think that's the other one that I loved is Mass Effect has a naming convention. Basically anything space related. The main reason why your character's the main character in Mass Effect's named Shepard is in reference to Alan Shepard, the first American in space. Or you have Miranda, named for the planet Miranda in Serenity / Firefly. And so many others are like that, but I can't think of the other ones off the top of my head. Do you have any other ones that you can think of with weird naming conventions and such?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. Although when it comes to Mass Effect, I was a fan of Rex.
Mm-hmm.
It's a simple guy.
He's a simple guy. Shepard, Rex. That and Blasto. I'd love to watch the Blasto trilogy. And then when Blasto gets his new partner. So with that being said, any kind of final thoughts on that? To me, the big important thing is that if you're going to go with a naming convention, stick with it. Don't chicken out on it. Don't mess with it halfway. Just stick with it. Go hard into your naming conventions.
Have fun with it.
And have fun with it. They're fun naming conventions. I think where the state that DuckTales takes place in is like Calisoda.
I don't remember the state name. I do remember certain cities being named. Obviously, Duckburg, Cape Suzette.
Yeah.
Though that's partially, crossing over with another cartoon.
But yeah, that's about it for this episode. Our next episode that will be coming out will be on May 20th, and we hope to see you there. This is Gaming Theater Podcast with another EXP boost, and Gaming Theater Podcast logging out.
Thank you all for having me, and I will catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Gaming Theater Podcast is hosted, created, produced, and edited by Leo Garcia, the Geek Scorpio. Our music is A Drinking Game, stock media provided by Stormwave Audio / Pond 5. Our cover art is by Adam Parker. You can find him at ParkerGFX on Twitter. If you want to send us some financial support to help with producing things for Gaming Theater, you can do so at patreon.com/gamingtheaterpresents. It helps us out. Want to send support that doesn't hit your wallet? Please leave a review with wherever you hear your podcasts and share our podcast with your friends. It really helps out. Thank you for listening.